Hello! Welcome to Number System for Dummies like me. Okay, so before I start anything, I want you to watch Shalisha's Music Theory 1 video, specifically the one about scales and chords. I will put the link in the comments, so please go watch that first, because she gives us a basic knowledge of music theory and teaches us about scales, which is going to be important to understand the numbers. And she gives us some shortcuts and phrases that I'm going to be using in this that I'm not going to reteach or explain. I'm just going to assume that you know what I'm talking about from that video. So please go do that. Otherwise, you're going to be confused. Okay, so now that you've watched that, you have some basic knowledge of music theory. And now the reason that I wanted to make this video is because I wanted to now take that knowledge and then apply it really practically to, all right, I'm sitting down ready to practice my instrument and I have lead sheets in front of me and I need to know how to transfer those to numbers, and so that I can practice and that I can train my brain to know what the numbers are in a certain key. Now, the easiest thing that you could do for this is if you have a number chart and a chord chart for the same song, you could just put them side by side and then just, compare the notes and write them out. But most songs are not going to have all 7 chords within that key. So you're going to be limiting yourself and your knowledge of that key by doing that. So you're going to want to actually write out all 7 of the numbers for that particular key that you're working on, so that then again you can know all of them and memorize them and really work on that, because the whole point of this is to go sometimes beyond just the song that you're working on. That if a band director calls out a specific chord progression that might not even be in the song, that you know what number is associated with the chord that you need to play then in that key. So another question I got was, why not just make a big cheat sheet for everybody? Like just the numbers, every key that could possibly exist, and then just all the chords within that key. Yes, I could do that, but cheat sheets are really good for just like quick accessibility, but they don't actually teach you the why behind what you're learning. So this is actually going to be more practical for you to A, push yourself to know how to do it yourself, but then secondarily to actually, again, train your brain to know what you're doing and why you're doing it and why certain chords are the way they are within a key. So I really want you to work on doing this for every key that you work on, and then once you have them all written down, then you have your own cheat sheet at home. But basically, I wanted to make this video from the perspective of someone who was not formally trained in music. I didn't go to school for it. Everything that I have learned about music theory has been through Shalisha and the workshops she's done and teaching other people and observing her do that. So I wanted to make this video because I'm just like you maybe. I am learning this myself. And so I wanted to give you some tools from the perspective of someone who was not trained in this and who might be able to also speak into some other instruments and how we can apply that everywhere. So let's dig in. The very first thing that I want you to do is, if you play piano, hopefully you have a piano at home that you can see the keys and you know the notes that are associated with those keys, so great. But if you don't play piano, which most of you don't, I want you to do this. I want you to take a diagram of a piano with at least of just the 12 notes that Shalisha talked about, with the actual letters on those keys. As Shalisha mentioned, piano is kind of the foundational instrument of music. And while you don't necessarily need to know how to play it, you do need to understand it visually, and this is going to be the best visual representation for finding half steps and whole steps, which will be really helpful to you, and you'll see why soon. So what I want you to do is, especially if you don't play piano, find this, I just Googled it, and print it out and actually display it somewhere where you practice, that you can have it easily accessible to you. Okay, so now that you have that, let's actually try doing this with a key, and I'm going to take you through the steps that I did to help myself find the numbers within that key. So Shalisha already went through the key of C in her video. It's the easiest key because it's all white keys. There's no sharps or flats in the key of C. So I'm going to take you through a couple of harder keys so that you can encounter some of those half steps and whole steps with black keys that you encounter. So if you have a lead sheet in front of you and you don't actually know what key it's in, then use some of the tips that Shalisha gave you in the first video to finding the key. But then let's just say, okay, now you know what key it's in. Most of us, we have, Planning Center that has like the key right next to the title. So you know what key that song is in already, hopefully. So now that you know the key that we're working in, I want you to get out a literal piece of paper and write this down. So the very first step is just writing numbers 1 through 7 in a column. Okay, now the next step is going to be associating a letter with those numbers. So if we're in the key of D, for example, that's one that we're working on a lot right now. I am going to put a D next to 1 because whatever key you're working with, that letter is the 1 always. So if you're in the key of A flat, the 1 is going to be A flat. If you're in the key of E, E is going to be your 1. So that's basically just giving us a starting point for then the next step, okay? So you're starting with, we're working on D right now in this video, so D will go next to the 1. Now, what you're doing is you're just following the piano alphabet just straight down. Very easy. So we're starting with D, and then you go to E, F, G, and then it goes to A, B, C. So remember, we're dealing with the piano alphabet, which remember goes just from A to G and then it circles back to A again. So all we're doing with the 1 is basically it's just starting somewhere in that circle and then you're just going in order. So in this case, we're starting with D and then what you'll see is you'll go 2 is E, 3 is F, 4 is G. So then what you'll see from 4 to 5 is it goes from G to A. And then it just circles back around. So 5 is A, 6 is B, and 7 is C. Okay, so now you have letters associated with those numbers now. Okay, now the third step in this is finding if there are any sharps or flats. Okay, so this is where the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern comes into play. This is where we're finding the scale of this. So you're gonna look at your piano diagram here and you're going to start with D because that's our 1. And so you're just going to follow the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern to find whatever that next number is. Okay, so from D, we go whole. That's just a regular E. Whole. Oh, now we're on a black key. So now what you'll see on your diagram is it says G flat and F sharp. So you might be like, okay, well, which one do I write down? Well, we're finding the 3 at this point. We did whole to find the E, which is the 2. Now we're at whole, and now we're on the 3. So we already assigned a letter to that number. It's F. So we are going to say F sharp in this case, not G flat, because G is already taken in the 4, as you'll see. Now this is going to be really important because there are some keys, like the key of G flat, for example. We always joke about this. There's a C flat in the key of G flat, which you might be like, okay, well, C flat doesn't exist. That's just a B. That's just one of the white keys. Why would we call it C flat? Well, because each number has to be associated with a different letter. So if you're dealing with the key of G flat, you can't technically have a B flat and a B in the same key. It has to be associated, that next one has to be associated with the C, which makes that B a C flat in that key. Okay, so it might be a little confusing at face value, but it makes sense when you recognize that each number is associated with a different letter to make it actually easy for us to remember. So in this case, when we got to this G flat or F sharp, in the key of D, G is already taken in the 4. So when I'm looking for the 3, it has to be F sharp. Just the easiest way to look at it is I already assigned an F, so I'm gonna do the one that says F on that black key. So now we have 3 is the F sharp. So now we did whole, whole. Now we go half to just a regular G. Then we're gonna do whole, 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 okay? So from the G, we're gonna go whole to A, whole to B, and then whole again. Oh, we're on a black key again, and that is going to be C sharp. Okay, so now we have associated either sharps or flats in this column, and in this key there happens to only be 2. Now, another question that we get is, how do you know what is a flat key or what is a sharp key? Well, again, the easiest way that you can do this is when you get to the first sharp or flat that you encounter and you follow the rules that I just said, and we decided that 3 was F sharp, that means that that key is a sharp key, which means that any other black keys that you're going to encounter are going to be sharps. Another way to look at it is if you're trying to use verbiage for that key, if you look at a lead sheet and you see sharps, it's a sharp key. If you look at the lead sheet and there are flats, it's a flat key. If you look at it and there are no sharps or flats, and it's not the key of C, there just happens to not be any chords with a black key, you would need to actually, again, use this process to find if there are sharps or flats in it. And that's going to be important because you technically can't mix flats and sharps within a key. This is why sometimes you might be like referring to just a note and you might say, oh, well, you need to play the G flat there. And we might have to correct you and say, actually, that's an F sharp. And it's not because we're just being corrected for the sake of it. It's because when you're thinking music theory wise, you can't mix sharps and flats. And again, within a specific key, you have to call the notes the right notes within that key. Otherwise, it gets really confusing. We have to have the same mindset in order to communicate effectively as musicians. So that's how you find out if the key that you're working with is a sharp key or a flat key. So in this case, we encountered 2 sharps. It's a sharp key. Okay, so now we have numbers, now we have letters, now we have sharps or flats assigned, and now we assign major and minor chords. So bass players, this is actually where you stop. You don't play chords, you play single notes. So you basically only need those first 3 steps. For chorded instruments, you need this 4th step to know what chords are major and what chords are minor. So if you see just the regular D, E, F sharp, G on a lead sheet, you can assume that it's major unless you see a little M next to it. So the little M means that it's a minor chord. So now we're going to assign which ones are minor. All right, so here's the rule for that. The 2, 3, and 6 are always minor. A little trick that we like to use is 2 times 3 equals 6. That's just a good way to remember 2, 3, and 6 are always minor. So you're gonna go ahead and put a little M next to the 2, the 3, and the 6. Okay, so then the only outlier here is the 7. So 1, 4, and 5 are always major. But the 7 is weird. It's a diminished chord, which not a lot of songs use it, but actually some are kind of delving into touching that chord a little bit to make it really edgy. Also, a lot of worship songs are using the 7 in like the bass note with another chord. So we can't always ignore the 7, especially bass players. You need to know what that 7 is because it's been especially used a lot in the bass notes lately in worship music. So now you're gonna have a little M next to 2, 3, and 6, and then you're gonna write D-I-M next to the 7, which makes the C sharp diminished chord. All right, so then that's it. Like now you have your numbers and then you have your chords associated with those numbers within that key. Now basically what you need to do is you need to memorize what those numbers are within that key. And then hopefully the idea is that you work on 1 or 2 keys at a time and start with like the easier ones and then move on to some of the harder ones, landing on like the flat ones later that are not as fun. But basically the idea would be that you work on it so much that you memorize what those numbers are associated with the chords in those keys. And then eventually you have this bank in your head and you just know that when somebody calls out the 4 of the key of D, you just know it's G. Another step that you could do for this is actually then applying it to the lead sheets that you're practicing with is, again, you could take out a lead sheet and print it out and just write the numbers next to the chords, or vice versa. You can print out the number chart and write the chords next to the numbers. And then practice like that with both of them in front of you so that you're training your brain to associate those numbers with those chords. And then eventually when you feel comfortable with it, you need to take away the chords and only look at the number chart. Now this is where you really got to stretch yourself and you got to stretch your brain to really think it through, because your confidence monitors are not going to have chords on the screen. And they're not going to have them really close next to each other like you would write them on your lead sheet. You're only going to see numbers. So you do have to practice at some point with just the numbers, no chords in front of you. But again, just kind of training yourself on some keys at a time and then working toward the harder ones later. Okay, so now let's try a little bit of a harder key just to get you more familiar with some more of the black keys, but also let's work on a flat key. Let's work on A flat because I mentioned it earlier. Okay, so you're gonna follow the same steps that I just showed you with D. Okay, so you're gonna write 1 through 7 again. And now we're in the key of A flat. So you're gonna write A flat next to the 1. All right, so this already has a flat associated with it, but go ahead and put that in the 1 because you need to know where you're starting from. You need to know that the flat of A is your starting point for the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern that you're gonna be following. So go ahead and write A flat. And now, again, let's just ignore the flat for just a second and just follow just the letter down through the numbers. So you started with A, you're just gonna go B, C, D, E, F, G. Now this one just happens to work out really well that because it started with A, it just landed on G and you didn't have to like circle back around in the piano alphabet. But now you have at least the numbers and a letter associated with those numbers. Okay, so now we're going to assign flats. Again, the 1 is an A flat, so we already know that we're only gonna be putting flats in this key. So you're gonna now go over to your piano diagram again, start with A flat as your 1, and do the pattern. So whole is going to be B flat, whole is going to be a regular C, half is going to be a D flat, and then you're going to go whole again, E flat, whole is going to be a regular F, and then whole again is going to be a regular G. Okay, so now you have flats assigned to this. There's 4 in this key, so it's a lot more black keys in this one. Okay, so now your last step is gonna be assigning majors and minors. So again, you're gonna put the little M next to 2 times 3 equals 6. So you're gonna put a little M next to the 2, the 3, and the 6. And then you're gonna put diminished next to the 7, which is the G there. So now you have 1 is A flat, 2 is B flat minor, 3 is C minor, 4 is D flat, 5 is E flat, 6 is F minor, and the 7 is the G diminished chord. Okay, so now you have that. And basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna do this with every key that you encounter. Like I said, I would encourage you to work on 1 or 2 keys at a time. Obviously, maybe just as you're actually practicing for weekend services or whatever you're practicing for, maybe take those keys, and we might start a couple of them with some harder keys, but really, really work on a couple of keys at a time, and then make sure that you're still practicing them. If we start to move on to other keys, try to retain the information and still practice with the other keys that you started with. And then again, like I said, hopefully as you're writing these down, you're gonna then have your own bank of cheat sheets, so to speak, on all of these keys. And then eventually you will have them for every single key. And then you're able to now find them on your own. You're able to have a visual representation of what's in front of you. And then you're able to practice and actually then sit down and apply that to what you're practicing. All right, well, I hope that that was helpful and practical for you. As always, let us know if you have any questions or if anything was confusing and we can elaborate a little bit further. But hopefully that this was beneficial to you, and hopefully it will give you tools to use as you continue to learn the number system.